Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
This is Frank Agin, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections. I'm your host of the Networking RX podcast. Welcome back for another episode. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about giving. After all, one of the primary tenets of networking is to become successful, you have to give to others. That giving could include money, clothing, or other necessities. For our purposes of using networking to enhance our professional lives, giving includes referrals, opportunities, information, and contacts. But before we get started, and I'd be remiss if I did not mention this, remember, we're looking to add quality people to our stable of franchisees. This is a unique franchise opportunity in that it's geared for aspiring entrepreneurs or professionals to add on to what they're already doing. As I've said in the past, all our franchisees do something else. For a couple hours in the morning, a few days a week, our franchisees operate the AmSpirit Business Connections program. The rest of the week, they're on with the rest of their lives. They're accountants, they're attorneys, they're financial advisors, realtors, coaches, consultants of various kinds. If you're interested, contact me. There's an email in the show notes, or use the one we provide at the end of the podcast. At any rate, back to giving. You don't have to think about giving, otherwise known as altruism or generosity, whatever you call it. You don't have to think about it much to realize that not all giving is created equal. You don't have to think about it much, but there are those who have given it a lot of thought. One such person was a 12th century physician, as well as a Jewish philosopher and scholar, who became one of the most influential Torah scholars of the Middle Ages. His name was, and I'm going to struggle with this, his name was Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. That's a mouthful, and so I'm very, very thankful that he has been commonly referred to by an acronym of all of that, which is Rambam, which I can handle. At any rate, as part of his teachings, Rambam identified 8 distinct levels of generosity. Now, to be perfectly honest, I do a fair amount of reading. I can't say, however, I've ever turned any dusty, musty pages from medieval scholars. Again, fortunately for me, someone has, and that is a woman by the name of Julie Salomon. She's a journalist, done work with the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, as well as the author of 10 different books. One of her books, which she released in 2003, I did read. Called Rambam's Ladder, a meditation on generosity and why it's important to give. In this book, Salomon details the works of Rambam, which we will review rung by rung. Now, does any of this matter? I would argue yes. A cursory understanding of Rambam's Ladder is useful for us as we develop our generosity and strive to become more effective at networking. More specifically, this understanding will allow us to gain a sense as to which rung we stand upon, and we'll likely recognize that we stand on different rungs in different situations at different times. In short, this understanding will allow each of us to advance our giving or our altruism to a greater degree. Before we get started, though, please understand that every level of Rambam's ladder constitutes generosity. But each rung up the ladder constitutes a greater degree of altruism than the one before. So let's get started. Starting from the lowest rung and moving up to the highest height of altruism on Rambam's ladder, here's an overview. Rung number 1, which is referred to as reluctance. On this rung, a person gives and is no doubt charitable, as they've parted with a portion of their wealth for the benefit of another. But in their hearts and their minds, however, they're not happy about it. They give more out of a reluctant obligation. Perhaps someone is forcing their hand, such as at an office fundraiser. Whatever the case, the person doesn't want to give but does, likely uttering or thinking something akin to, "Oh, right here," as they hand over money. That's the first rung of Rambam's ladder, reluctance. Rung number 2, known as proportion. On this rung, the person gives, and there's no reluctance in the gesture. However, the proportion of what the person gives relative to what they could have given is rather low. This is the situation where, say, a high-end corporate lawyer is happy to give to an office cause, maybe a coworker who's down on his or her luck, but only gives a few dollars when giving a few hundred would be easily possible. Again, let me be clear. There's nothing wrong with this high-end corporate lawyer. He or she was generous. Awesome. Rambam's ladder, Rambam's point, I should say, is simply that there's a higher order of generosity to aspire to, right? It's not a matter of right and wrong. It's simply a matter of striving to get better relative to our giving. Okay, rung number 3, known as solicitation. On this rung, to garner a person's charity, even though they're willing and happy to give in a reasonable proportion, someone has to ask. If you think about it, this third rung of Rambam's ladder is where most of us have our feet firmly planted most of the time. Maybe not in all situations, but in lots of situations. And again, we shouldn't feel bad about this. After all, often we don't know about a need until someone asks. Besides, the third rung's not bad. It's generosity. It's just not generosity at its highest form. So let's move on. Rung number 4, known as shame. On this fourth rung, a person is actively seeking to give in reasonable proportion without someone having to ask. This, however, comes at a risk. The risk is that this person is providing unsolicited generosity that could potentially embarrass the person they seek to help. That is, the potential recipient might not need the assistance or want the assistance, or perhaps they're simply too proud to accept it. Whatever the case, the recipient potentially could feel a sense of embarrassment, create a sense of shame in this process. Again, on this rung, the person has engaged in a higher level of giving relative to the first 3 rungs, and he or she should be commended for that. There is, however, room for improvement, which brings us to rung number 5, known as boundaries. And I'm not exactly sure as to why it's called this. Nevertheless, in this situation, the person contributes without being asked, and the gift is likely significant in light of their income or net worth, and they've eliminated the risk of shaming the recipient. The person, however, wants their name associated with the gift. For example, this might be a college scholarship or a scholarship of some sort, or a grant bearing the person's name. Much about the gift is admirable. Their heart's in it, the amount is significant, a gift is unsolicited, and there's no risk of embarrassing someone. However, there's a degree of self-interest or ego as the person requires their name to be attached to the generosity. Moving up, rung number 6, known as corruption. And again, I'm not exactly clear as to why it gets this title, but on this rung, the person seeks to make an unsolicited contribution to someone they know. For whatever reason, however, they don't want their name associated with the gift. Perhaps this is referred to as corruption because there's a level of secrecy behind it, or perhaps it gets the name from the fact that in medieval times, many benefactors didn't necessarily trust those who were responsible for distributing charity. It might be the church or the government official. So these generous souls would walk around in secrecy and put coins under the doors of the poor. But essentially what's happening under the 6th rung, known as corruption, is that the person is making a contribution, is helping someone else, but keeping themselves, they know who they're helping, but they're keeping themselves anonymous. On the 7th rung, which moves us up closer to the top, and that's known as anonymity, on the 7th rung, the person gladly makes an unsolicited contribution, but their contribution doesn't go to anyone in particular that they know. this giving is really just this giving for the sake of giving. Through time, and certainly today, there are organizations, governmental entities, and churches that have established what we'll call anonymous funds, where benefactors can simply give significantly and freely, and then the organization, government, or church can distribute the monies to those in need. The benefactor doesn't know who's receiving the aid, and the needy don't know who's contributing them. Of course, unlike the corruption rung, number 6, the benefactor trusts the distributing organization, which kind of separates the two. Under corruption, people are the benefactors giving directly to the people that they know because they don't trust the government organization or church to do what's right. So this is rung number 7 is people contributing to United Way or Salvation Army, or really any number of organizations out there. And pretty much any religious denomination today has these, they don't call them anonymous funds, but more or less that's what they are. It's a great level of generosity, rung number 7, though it's not the top rung. That's rung number 8, known as responsibility. This final rung is similar to the Chinese proverb, give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day, teach a man to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime. In this situation, the person contributes in a manner that empowers another so that they are less likely in need in the future, or maybe not have a need ever again. This level of generosity can take many forms, such as creating an endowment or some sort of permanent funding whereby aid will always be there. So in other words, they're giving once and that's setting up so someone's taken care of forever or for a lifetime. Or they might be entering into a partnership with somebody to continually benefit them. Or they might be helping someone get started or become successful with a profession or a business. Or perhaps aiding someone somehow to find gainful employment by helping them with job skills, by ensuring that they get the appropriate education, by helping them with their resume or interviewing skills, or even by making introductions. This is the greatest level of generosity, as it serves to strengthen or position another so they're not going to be dependent upon others again, or less dependent on others. Okay, those are the 8 rungs of Rambam's ladder. To be honest, I don't have them committed to memory. I'm very clear about the rungs towards the bottom, and I'm reasonably clear about the ones at the top. Rungs 4, 5, and 6, I need to think on from time to time and even look up to refresh my memory. The important thing to remember, I don't expect you to memorize those either. The important thing to remember is that not all giving is the same. It's all good, mind you, but some is more noble than others. Some much more. So having a general understanding of Rambam's ladder will give you a general sense as to where your head is at and your heart relative to generosity. For me, I don't see myself permanently fixed on any particular rung. Looking back, there are times I've only been on the first rung. And then there are other times where I had a foot on a different rung up the ladder. It depends on the charity. It depends on the person in need. It depends on my financial situation. But knowing Rambam's ladder, even if just a cursory understanding of it, has served to make me more intentional in not just helping others, but how I go about it. And I hope it'll do the same for you.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connections. All rights reserved.